Okay, everyone, welcome back to week 2, part 2 of this week's lecture. This part will be more using systems of two linear equations and two variables. Pretty much this entire lecture will involve questions using systems, elimination, substitution, and sometimes we actually have to make that system ourselves based on the context of the question. Okay, so jumping straight in, we have cafe sales. A cafe sells a cup of coffee for $5 and a cup of tea for 20% less than the price of a coffee. On Tuesday, the cafe collected $1,265 for selling a total of 278 cups of coffee and tea. Which system of equations shows the relationship between the cups of coffee sold, X, and the number of cups of tea sold, Y? Okay, so we know that X is the cups of coffee sold and Y is the cups of tea sold, and that X plus Y equals 278, and that is from selling a total of 278 cups of coffee and tea. Now, when figuring out the cost of cup of tea, again, it is 20% less, so we can just use this formula to figure out that, cup of tea is 80% of a cup of coffee, which is $4, and we can also do, since we're looking for money for the second equation, we can do 5 times x, which is the number of cup of coffees, and 4 times y, which is the price of a cup of tea, and that's how much money we made. So that is our answer here. Okay, kayak trip. During his 5.5-hour kayak trip, Fred encountered varying currents, which caused him to kayak at 8 miles an hour, and half that speed for part of the trip, and the remainder of the trip if he kayaked 32 miles. What is the relationship between the time S he spent kayaking at the slower speed and F he spent kayaking at a faster speed? So again, naming our variables. S is when he's kayaking at a slower speed. F is when he's kayaking at a faster speed. And we know that he spent a total of 5.5 hours of kayaking. So remember, S is actually the time he spent kayaking slower speed, and F is the time he spent kayaking at a faster speed. So because our units are time, we can do S plus F equals 5.5 hours. Now, to figure out the slow speed, remember it says they moved half the speed of 8 miles per hour. So our slow speed is 4 miles per hour. So again, just like the question before, we can multiply 4 times S and 8 times F to get a total of 32 miles. And because S plus F equals 5.5 accounts for the number of hours he spent kayaking, this accounts for the total distance he spent traveling. So that is our answer here. Okay, apples and pears. David and Sam sold apples and pears at the festival. David collected $12 for selling a half dozen apples and a dozen pears. Sam collected the same amount for selling 2 dozen apples and no pears. What is the price of a pear? Okay, so David collected $12 for selling half a dozen apples. So they don't specify units, so we can just do X and Y to make it simpler. If you want to do A and P, that's fine too. But half a dozen apples and a dozen pears equals $12, so we can do 6 times X, or X apples, plus 12 times Y, or Y is pears, to get $12. And we also know that 2 dozen apples is also $12. And we can just use substitution here. So we solve for X of 24x equals 12. And again, that one is from 2 dozen apples and no pears, so we don't need Y here. X is 0.5. And again, when you work with money, get used to adding that extra 0 at the end, because for money questions, you do need that extra 0, or else you will get that question wrong. So let's say your answer is like $12.5. you have to have 12.50. You can't have 12.5. That's only when you work with money though. Okay, so once we have our substitution, we plug x in to the original equation, the first one we have, and we solve for y. So we have 3 plus 12y equals 12, 12y equals 9, y equals 75.75, sorry, which means the price of our pair is 75 cents. Strategic solving, we have this system here, and they give us y. Y is -6. We have to find -9c, meaning we have to find c and plug it in to multiply by -9. But they did give us the y value, so that helps us out. So we start with our first equation, and we just plug in our y, solve it out. We end up with x being -9/2. Now, I simplify the math, but, you'll end up with 2/9x equals -1. Divide by 2/9, you'll end up with -9/2. Then, we can plug in x into the second equation. So, we just plug it in here. And then we also plug in y as well. I simplified it. But if you want to check the math yourself, go ahead. We just solve for c, so we combine like terms, meaning c is -4/27. Then again, we want the value of -9c, so we multiply that by -9, and you'll end up with 4/3. Okay, many fraction coefficients. Again, we have a system, and we just need to find the solution. So when you have something like this, these two, this system, these equations, where, it just looks like a bunch of numbers and it looks really complicated, try and eliminate as many like terms, or combine as many like terms as possible. So that top equation, that +2 equals 2, you can actually just subtract it and you'll end up with 2/3x minus 4/5y equals 0. And then for the second equation, we just want to combine these like terms, so we'll just move everything to the left side to have it equal 0. You'll end up with -2/3x plus 4/5y equals 0. And if you actually compare it with the first equation, you'll notice that you'll actually, when you try eliminating, you'll end up with 0 equals 0, which means we have infinitely many solutions. Tiling a floor, we have a square foot, or 100 square feet, or a 100 square foot room can be tiled with 80 large tiles and 80 small ones. A large one is 0.75 feet squared, larger than a small tile. How many small tiles would it take to tile the 100 foot squared room using only small tiles? Okay, again, make these into equations. 80 large tiles, or L, and 80 small tiles, or S, equals 100 square feet. And a large tile is 0.75 feet squared larger. So if you rearrange that, you'll end up with L minus S equals 0.75. We just want to eliminate one. Now, we are given that the large one is 0.75 larger than a small one. So we can just look for S here. So we'll try eliminating L. And we'll do that by multiplying by -80, simplified, and adding by the first equation. You'll cross out L. You'll end up with 180 S equals 40. S equals 0.25 feet squared. And that's how many small tiles we have, or that's the size of a small tile. And if we want to fill that 100 square foot room using only small tiles, we'll divide here, and we'll get 400 small tiles. Find the solution. This one's just pretty straightforward. We just solve. So We'll simplify the bottom one first. So we don't really like working with these fractions here, so we'll just multiply everything by 4 to get rid of that 1/4. And by doing so, we'll get negative 2x minus y equals 100. And we'll simplify the top one as well. This one's pretty straightforward. Just multiply by 3. And you can just substitute that 12y in for the x. And we'll do negative 2 times 12y minus y equals 100. 25y equals 100. Y equals negative 4. And we'll actually just plug that back into the first one. X equals 12 times negative 4. X equals negative 48. That is our solution here. Comparing volumes, Roger makes a 700 milliliter solution with 5 small jars of a certain substance and 3 large jars of water. The volume of the large jar is triple the volume of a small jar. How many more milliliters of liquid does a large jar hold compared to the small jar? So this is similar to the tile question, except instead of looking for how many small tiles it'll take to fill the room, we're actually finding the difference between the smaller jar and the bigger jar. So 5 small jars and 3 large jars equals 700 milliliters. That's our first one. And the volume of a large jar is 3 times the size of a small jar. So 3s equals L. Again, you just substitute that in. You'll end up with 14s equals 700. S equals 50. Again, plug that back into the smaller equation, the small second one. L equals 3 times 50, 150. Remember, we want to know how much more liquid does a large jar hold. And that will be 100 milliliters. Okay. If AB equals 8, BC equals 4, AC equals 3, what equals ABC? Now, this type of question is fairly common. They just want to confuse you. And the best way to go about this is you have to think about multiplying all of them together. You'll get a squared times b squared times c squared, which also equals abc squared, because that square will just transfer to all three. So you can actually just plug that back into the first equation we had, so that ab times bc times ac. That'll be 8 times 4 times 3 equals abc squared. You'll simplify it out, and then we'll look for the square root. Now, from our option choices, they are simplified. So in order to simplify, we look at which number can be multiplied twice to pull it out to get the smallest number. That pretty much just means in order to get this 4 outside of the root, we need to be able to divide 96 by 4 twice, and in this case we can, and that will be the biggest number we can pull on the outside, which will end up with 4 root 6. Okay, last question for today. If the system has infinitely many solutions, find the constant c. Now we've worked with many no solution questions, and this actually might be the first infinitely many besides the one we solved for earlier. And keep in mind, these are mixed fractions. You'll usually never see mixed fractions unless they explicitly ask for it. So please keep that in mind on the SAT. Use improper fractions unless told otherwise. Now in this case, we do have mixed fractions, so again, we have to keep that in mind. So we have to find c, and we have infinitely many solutions. So that changes how we approach this problem. Again, we want to simplify as much as we can, so we'll just combine like terms here for that second equation. And we'll multiply that first equation by 2 to eliminate, sorry, not eliminate, but what you'll notice is that when we simplify that, we'll get 10x minus 2 over 5y, and both equations have 10x minus 2 over 5y. So in this case, we can actually equal that, what's it called? We can equate that 3 over 2 to 6 minus 2c. So again, you just match these equations here. You'll get 6 minus 2c equals 3 over 2. Solve for c, you'll end up with 9 over 4, or 2 1/4. So that is it for today. If you guys liked the video, please like and subscribe.